Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to 7th grade science. I'm Miss Harrington. We are going to continue on with our body systems today. We left off a little bit on respiratory system, but I'm just going to go back and recap what we did. Before we get started, remember that we can do live questions in this presentation. You just need to get a device that you can go to www.slido.com, and it's going to ask you for a code, and the code is 5106. Notice there's a green button at the top, and there's also going to be, whenever the question comes up, they're going to remind you of that code as well, and that code will be on every slide. So just remember to have that ready. Now the trick is you have to stay on that screen, and it's going to tell you no poll available, but don't exit out, because when a question shows up on the board, it'll show up on your screen. So it's just a live questioning that we're going to do throughout the presentation. So we are going to go ahead and get started. We left off on the respiratory system, and we start with two statements every time that I want you to think about when you read it. Do you agree with this statement, or do you disagree? And this is before we've gone into the content, so your answers might change at the end. So let's see. The first one is breathing and respiration are the same. Think about whether they are the same or whether they're not. And we've talked about cellular respiration earlier in the school year. And think about what cellular respiration is and think about what you think breathing is. And let's come back to that later. Okay, lungs are the only parts of the body that use oxygen. So think whether you agree with that or whether you disagree. And we'll come back later at the end. So let's get into the functions. We always start with the functions of the system before we get into the organs. And the function here is breathing, very simple. So if you've ever held your breath, you probably took deep breaths afterwards because your body needed to regain some of that oxygen. So basically, the respiratory system's function is to breathe, and it's the movement of air into and out of the lungs. And the main thing here is to bring in a gas that we called oxygen that you need, and to get rid of carbon dioxide, which is a gas that your body does not need. So that gets us into breaking down the functions, so taking in oxygen. So think about the plumbing pipes in your house and what they do. They bring in water to your house and disperse it to where the water needs to go. Well, your lungs do the same thing in your respiratory system. They're going to bring in oxygen, which is something that you have to have. In fact, your brain needs it in order to function. So we've talked about involuntary and voluntary a few weeks ago. Involuntary is something that your body does without you having to tell it to. It's something that's your conscious is not telling you to do, consciously doing it. So unconsciously, your body is breathing for you because your brain is receiving that oxygen and telling your body to breathe. So that's really important. Also, remember the words cellular respiration, and cellular respiration is chemical reactions. However, it's the chemical reaction that your cells do to bring in oxygen and to get rid of carbon dioxide. And that should sound very familiar to the functions that we just talked about in breathing. Okay, now not only does your body bring in oxygen and your respiratory system help with that, but your respiratory system also gets rid of or eliminates carbon dioxide. We've talked about elimination and excretion, so remember this is a type of excretion here. So a house's plumbing pipes, not only are going to bring in water to where it needs to go, but it's also going to get rid of water that's no longer needed. So elimination of carbon dioxide is like eliminating the water from the water pipes in your house. And carbon dioxide is actually considered a waste gas that your body does not need. So in other words, your body wants to get rid of it as soon as possible. Our first question today, so remember, if you're on slido.com and the code 5106, the screen that you're looking at should have the question that's on the board. The question is, which is not a function of the respiratory system? So if you'll go in and just pick what you think is not a function, keyword there. Okay. There we go. We have one answer. Let's see if we can get a few more. Okay, so our one answer, it says taking in oxygen. What is not a function of the respiratory system? So remember, the respiratory system does take in oxygen. It does eliminate carbon dioxide, but it does not have anything to do with the movement of your body. So our correct answer would be movement. We got 5 answers there. That's good. We got to have some people that are awake. All right, organs of the respiratory system. So I'm going to show you a picture in just a second of these organs, but we're going to talk about your nose and your mouth first. Your nose and your mouth are important organs of your respiratory system. It's what brings in that oxygen, that breath of air that you take in. And it's important because air enters your respiratory system through those things, but also your nose is going to warm up and moisten the air that comes into your body. And then your nose also has hairs, which kind of has sticky mucus on them. Not kind of, it does. And it's also going to keep that dust and the bacterial particles and things like that that you don't necessarily want in your body. It's going to trap those. And when we talked about cells at the beginning of the year, we talked about most cells have cilia on the outside of the cell membrane. And that cilia helps stick to other things so the cell can actually stay where it wants to be. Well, the cilia, or hair-like structures inside of your nose, actually trap those dust particles, the bacteria that comes in that you don't need, and things that your body just doesn't want to come in when you're breathing. Okay, so wave-like motions of the cilia are actually trap those particles from keeping them from going into your lungs. Okay, these are the organs that I told you I would show you. Now, we started with our mouth and our nose. Next, we have the pharynx, and after air enters through your mouth or your nose, or both, your pharynx is the tube-like passageway at the top of your throat. Now, not only will air come in, but your food and liquids that you take in can go through there as well. And you're thinking, well, I don't want to breathe in my food or my liquids. You're right, you don't want to. So at the end of the pharynx, there's a flap that can close off or open, and it keeps anything other than air coming into your respiratory system. So that flap is very helpful. The epiglottis is what we call that flap. It's a flap of tissue at the bottom of your pharynx, so right down here. Okay, then also you have your larynx and your trachea. Your larynx is your voice box, that wonderful voice box that all your teachers love. And your parents are loving it right now too. So the air passes from your pharynx into the triangle-shaped area called the voice box. So we're going from mouth to nose to pharynx, and then it goes over the larynx, which is your voice box. So your vocal cords are in your larynx, and they consist of 2 thick folds of tissue. Okay, and they vibrate to make sound, which in 8th grade we'll talk about where sound comes from and the waves that have to do with that. Air moves from your larynx into your trachea, and your trachea is a tube that's held open by the C-shaped ring of cartilage. Okay, so starting with mouth and nose, when you breathe in, air goes through the pharynx. The pharynx lets only air through over your larynx, which is your voice box. And then we're going to move into the trachea. All right, now the trachea is where it gets complex here. The trachea is actually going to branch. And if you notice here, you can see the 2 branches that go into your lungs. And so the trachea branches into 2 narrow tubes called the bronchi, and they lead into your lungs. The lungs are the main organs, which makes sense. You probably know that already, that your respiratory system, main thing you think about are your lungs. So inside your lungs, you have branches of the bronchi, and we call those narrow tubes the bronchioles, and the bronchioles are very important. Your bronchioles contain these little sac-like structures called alveoli, and alveoli is where all the magic happens. So this is where gas exchange is going to happen. So gas exchange, remember, breathe in oxygen, breathe out the harmful carbon dioxide. So during gas exchange, just like I said, oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide goes out. And if you look at this figure here with the alveoli look like a bunch of grapes, basically. They're really thin membranes, so it's only 1 cell thick for the membrane of the alveoli, and that's important because there's a blood vessel that wraps around it. So here you have the blood vessel around the alveoli. Notice that oxygen is pointing in to that blood vessel. And that's important because your oxygen needs to go throughout your body. It needs to get to your brain. It needs to be in your blood because your blood is going to take it to where it needs to go. So it makes sense that your alveoli is going to put oxygen into that blood vessel. But also, it's going to get rid of that carbon dioxide. So that alveoli is going to take in carbon dioxide from your blood vessel, and it's going to get rid of it. It's going to eliminate it while you breathe out. Okay, breathing and air pressure. So something that you probably haven't thought about is, well, what's the air pressure like of the air when you breathe in, and what's it like when you breathe out? So below your lungs is a large muscle called the diaphragm. And you can see in the pictures here, the diaphragm, it looks like it's just about right under your ribs. So if you take a deep breath in, notice that your chest goes up, okay? And that's your diaphragm pushing out. And then when you breathe out or you exhale, that's your diaphragm pushing down and pushing air out, okay? Now, as far as the air pressure of air, so think about what I said earlier. When you breathe in air molecules, your air is going to help moisten and warm up that air. Think about what hot things do. Hot things are going to spread apart and rise. So air molecules, when they go into your nose, are going to warm up and spread apart. So it's going to be less dense, not as heavy. But when you breathe out, that air is coming from a warmer environment into a cooler environment. So the air molecules are going to come closer together, which is going to make that air heavier. So I tell my students, I say, if you think about something that's dense or less dense, it's spread apart. Well, after you come in from PE, you're hot and you're sweaty. You don't want to be close to people because you can feel their body temperatures. So you spread apart. So it's a less dense area of kids. But then when you're cold, body temperatures are awesome. So you want to be closer. So you get closer together, and that's a more dense area. So you can think about it like that. Air molecules will spread apart when they're hot, but come together when they're cold. All right, here is another question for you. If you're on slido.com, code 5106, if you want to go ahead and join us. The question is, what is the function of the cilia? So we talked about this at the beginning. Cilia are the hair-like structures inside of your nose. What is the purpose of that? All right, it looks like we have some answers here. It says our 100% answer choice is keeps harmful particles from getting far into your respiratory system, and that is absolutely correct. We don't want dust in those particles that we don't need in our body inside of our respiratory system. Okay, another question. Which part of the respiratory system contains the bronchi? So remember, our trachea is going to branch off into two parts and lead into our lungs, which is where our bronchi are going to be. So our bronchi are going to be inside of our lungs. Okay, what gases are exchanged in the alveoli? Remember the grape-like structures with the blood vessel around it. Think about what gases are going to be exchanged there. Okay, looks like we're 50-50 here, but our correct answer is carbon dioxide and oxygen. Remember, it's going to put oxygen into our blood vessels, and it's going to eliminate carbon dioxide. All right, what happens to the area in your chest around your lungs when you inhale? So when you breathe in, think about what your chest does. Okay, so think about what your chest does. It moves up. So your diaphragm is going to contract and move up. All right, respiratory health. So some things that you've probably heard of. You've probably heard of the cold and the flu or other flu-like diseases. You've heard of bronchitis, most likely, pneumonia. We have asthma. We have emphysema and lung cancer. These are just some of the main ones that you've probably heard of in your lifetime. So if you've ever had a cold or allergies or asthma, you've noticed that it's really hard to breathe. And we call these respiratory illnesses because it is hard to breathe. It affects those organs that we've just talked about. that aid in breathing. So if these organs are having a hard time, it's going to hurt us in the overall process of bringing in oxygen. Okay, so you might have had a sore throat, a stuffed up head that made breathing uncomfortable. And the best way to maintain a good respiratory health is to stay away from irritants or air pollution. If we know, for example, there's a virus going around, staying socially distant away from each other. Also, common respiratory illnesses and their causes are listed here. So let's talk about these for a second. Cold and flu is caused by a virus, and it usually comes with congestion and runny nose, watery eyes. For me, a cold or flu, I think about having a bad fever. So a fever would be one of those things too. Bronchitis can be a viral or a bacterial infection. Coughing, tiredness resulting from mucus blocking your bronchioles, and it's going to cause slow air movement because you have blockage going on there. Pneumonia can be caused by a viral or a bacterial infection. This is going to cause trouble with breathing and result of fluid in the alveoli that slows gas exchange. So slow gas exchange means we're not getting rid of carbon dioxide as fast as we need to, and we're not getting oxygen through the body as fast as we need to. Okay, asthma can be caused by dust, smoke, pollen, air pollution. There's a bunch of different things that can cause asthma. So trouble breathing is one of the side effects here. Swollen airways. So if you think about if your airways, what brings in air is swollen, it's hard to actually breathe. Okay, emphysema can be caused by smoking as well as lung cancer. So we have coughing and tiredness, chest pains, and things with those too. All right, the last thing that we've talked about so far with every system is that system staying in homeostasis. Remember, that is the stable environment that your body is used to and your body needs in order to function properly. So the muscles and the respiratory system work together. So if you think about, we talked about muscular system early on, and we said that you have smooth muscle that makes up all the organs inside your body that need to contract and expand. Well, our lungs contract and expand, our alveoli contract and expand, our diaphragm contracts and expands, our nostrils do as well. So all of those things are important. So the muscular system actually works with your respiratory system to stay at homeostasis. Okay? Also, we're going to talk about the circulatory system next week. That system and the respiratory system work together to basically get oxygen to the body cells. The systems also work to remove carbon dioxide. The muscular system and the respiratory system and the circulatory system work together a lot in order to keep our body stable. Okay, question here. How do the respiratory and muscular systems work together to maintain your body's homeostasis? Good. Brings oxygen into your lungs and removes carbon dioxide from your lungs. Good job. All right, at the end of our presentation, we're going to go back to our statements that we started with. Breathing and respiration are the same. Think about if you think about if you now agree with it or disagree. So breathing, remember, is oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. And respiration, remember cellular respiration, what our mitochondria do, they take in oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. So yes, they can be the same thing. Okay, lungs are the only parts of the body that use oxygen. So we talked about early on in our skeletal system how our bones create red blood cells. And those are important because oxygen needs to be, red blood cells is what carries oxygen. Oxygen needs to go throughout your body. So yes, your lungs are parts of your body system that needs oxygen, but they're not the only ones. Okay, we are going to go into the circulatory system next week. We'll finish up with that for your body systems. But just remember that your teachers love you and we miss you, and I will see you next week to finish up with our body systems.